Kneel Before Blog presents Kneel Before Pod.
Hello and welcome to Kneel Before Pod interviews. I'm your host Craig, and I had the pleasure of chatting with Carl Bessai, director of the upcoming movie Field Sketches, and his lead actor Vincent Gale. The discussion covers deindustrialising filmmaking, the film industry in general, and a surprising amount of Seth Rogen. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I am delighted to be joined by Carl Bessai and Vincent Gale. How are you guys doing?
Really well, Craig. You?
I'm doing good. It's good to have you on to talk about this film.
So good to be here. All the way to Scotland with you. We love it.
All the way to Scotland. Vancouver to Scotland in an instant because of technology. Isn't it amazing?
Amazing.
Carl, you have this film that's coming out soon doing the festival circuit. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it, how the project came about?
Honestly, we're taking the film out into theaters ourselves. This is actually not a festival tour so much as it's a theatrical tour with the movie. We started booking screens. We're starting in Vancouver. We're going to Toronto. We're playing a couple of prairie cities in Canada. I've got some friends in Berlin helping me to get a screening there. We're really doing a kind of, I don't know, it's like a vaudeville approach. You know, we're going kind of city to city with our kit and our movie and our poster, and we're showing it to the people. Because it was made that way, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of got together. Vince and I have worked together for a long time, and I wanted to make this quite personal film. And I was looking for a collaborator, an actor to play the main character, but also someone to really help me shape the movie, create the narrative with me, help figure out kind of how we were going to do it, where we were going to shoot, and keep it very small. The whole approach philosophically was to make something that was very intimate and kind of a reflection of our lives as artists, where we are in our lives and our arc of work, our journey. And it was an exceptional experience. We shot in Vancouver. We shot in a bunch of places in Saskatchewan, which, if you don't know, is a very desolate prairie place in Canada. And then we went and shot in Berlin. And this was all done on a very small budget and with a handful of crew and a beautiful, tight ensemble of actors. Felt sometimes, I think, like a theater project.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I've spent a lot of my career working in the theater as well as in film and television. And there's an adage in the theater where it's, my mom has a barn, let's put on a show. And that's kind of what it was like. Carl had this place for us to play, and we just kept going out to people and saying, hey, we've got a barn. Do you want to come and do this play with us? And before you knew it, we had this lovely company of actors and some of the best actors in the country. And we were just kind of traveling around, stitching this beautiful text together.
And the blurb does say that it's a personal story filmed on your family homestead. So can you talk about what it means to you, what the personal story is that prompted this?
I just want to say sort of philosophically this thing about filmmaking that I feel is really important to say nowadays. We've got a very, very industrial style of making films in the world. Things are scaling up all the time. We tend to think big, write big, and then everything is about kind of raising these resources to make these giant projects happen. And my approach and the approach Vince and I took on this film was a sort of reverse engineering kind of idea. So if you have something that's in you think about those superpowers you were talking about, you have something that you have access to or that's beautiful or meaningful to you, and you reverse engineer a project out of it. So I've had in my family for generations this piece of land in Saskatchewan. My father was a family of German immigrants. They came to Canada. They set up a very primitive farm in rural Saskatchewan. I mean, it was back in the days where you had to prove a crop in order to own the land. If you could grow something on the land, you could essentially pay for your land. It was very early days, very primitive. This is where my father was a child, and the family didn't speak any English. He was the first person to learn English, and he became, over his life, quite educated and became an English professor. And so this sort of journey from his world to the world I live in, which is very urban, it's very educated. You know, it's a kind of upper middle kind of, we have no concept of this world of the land, of working with your hands, but the farm is still in the family. I have a cousin who continues to grow grain out on this land, and he's, for some reason, which I love, he's kept the original homestead, the original house, this building from I think it was first built in the 30s. The walls and the cracks and the stains from the lamp oil smoke and the old twisted doors and pieces of metal. It's so primal. And there's something kind of touching about that for me as someone who grew up without it, really. My father passed when I was very young, so there's a mythological side to the family history. So his Germanness, his roots in Europe, what the family was like. There's no one to ask the questions of. So I've been spending years sort of rooting through boxes and looking for clues. And in this old farmhouse, there's an old trunk full of letters and paraphernalia. And in the trunk, I discovered that in the late 1950s, around 1960, my father had gone to what was then East Germany to find and bring back his grandmother, who was trapped in East Germany after the war. She never made it with the rest of the family to Canada. And so having this crazy little piece of family history that I didn't know much about, and then I found my father's passport, and the passport had a visa. The visa was stamped in 1960 for the passage into East Germany. You couldn't just wander into East Germany back then. There was a wall, right? And so this little piece of history of getting grandma out, all of that was pretty fascinating to me. So our film is about a man who, like me, is an urban dwelling professional who started getting a little bit fed up with things in his life and is looking for something more meaningful. And then he goes back in time. In some ways, he stumbles upon these artifacts that help kind of inform his way forward in the movie. So yeah, it's a very magical, very slow, very rhythmic, very meditative movie. Yeah.
The synopsis I read suggests that it might be about burnout, which I think is quite common in today's world, just where you have so much stimulus. It's very easy to be overwhelmed and maybe want to escape that a bit. I know myself where sometimes I'll just turn my phone off and put it away for a couple of hours just to not be reachable for a little while.
It's incredible, that experience of just unplugging from the connected world. The technology is super addictive. The technology is just so tied into everything that we do that I completely agree with you. To be able to go somewhere for a moment in time where there's no Wi-Fi and there's no access and there's no information, and you just listen to the wind and you just watch the landscape and you watch the seasons change. There's a little bit of a nod to Henry Thoreau in the movie. Sometimes I think probably I sound really pretentious, but I loved reading Walden, the Thoreau book. And I don't know if you know it, but in Walden, Thoreau is essentially journaling his 2 years of living in this cabin. And he's not there because he's got nowhere to go. He's there because he wants to see what it's like to step away from all the social customs and all the norms and all the things that anchor humanity. And that was in the 1800s. So you can imagine how busy a life today is compared to then even. But Thoreau describes in this almost painful detail, some of the nuances of being kind of in the world without anyone or anything, and what he pays attention to. And I think sometimes we all need to do a little of that. In the film, our character Peter that Vince plays, maybe it's a little extreme going out for a year and unplugging like this is maybe a bit much. Maybe we can't all afford to do that or don't have time to do that. But that was the premise of the movie. Because for me personally, as an artist, I think sometimes as a filmmaker, you spend a lot of your time chasing. You're chasing actors, you're chasing money, you're chasing stories, you're chasing the way to execute your project. So partly the idea of deindustrializing the filmmaking process by making it very craft, hands-on, simple, small, and doing it in a way that supports the narrative of someone unplugging from this technological world. It was a breath of fresh air for me.
It was.
And what was it like as an actor to get in that headspace of being disconnected and unplugged and remote? Was it easy to get into that mindset?
It was very easy because of the constrictions that were set up. I was taken out of my life and I was transported to this farming community in Saskatchewan, as were the rest of the cast. You weren't reaching for your phone because you had no one, to contact, and no one was contacting you. And even if you had wanted to, you couldn't get a signal or any sort of reception where we were. So the task at hand became very small and simple. And that task was to play these scenes one after the other so that we could just step one foot in front of the other and create this film.
I'm working in a place that becomes an impromptu, it's an environment, but think of it like a stage. We brought our tools, we showed up with the pieces we needed. My van was full of costumes and various things that we knew we would need for the film. But then we just park and stay and play and try things, and magical things happen when you make space for them. I wasn't sure because we went and started this process in the latter part of October. And at that point in Saskatchewan, when it's getting colder, but it's still, you get a fall look. And we wanted the arc to go autumn, winter, spring. The film starts in Vancouver, it's summer, and we wanted that arc of seasons or whatever. And I had no actual idea how we were going to quite achieve that, because it wasn't really going to be hard winter during the time we had sort of...
I mean, you had talked at one point about maybe we'll employ some animation because we're never going to get the seasons that we need. And so maybe we'll animate some snow here or there to call to that.
Just come up with these creative ways to try to execute the sense of time passing. And then in our world of magical, simple, lo-fi solutions and coincidences, it's just a funny place in northern Canada. And it was the beginning of November and the snow started falling. So we'd already been able to shoot a nice series of scenes that presented all the autumn moments. And because we were shooting chronologically, the gods just dropped all this snow.
We woke up on morning 2 and there was snow everywhere. And it was just like, boom, we suddenly had our winter scene, which was...
This is acting, didn't it?
There was no acting required, Craig.
It's interesting to hear about the weather playing ball for a change, because you hear about so many productions where it's, the weather was a nightmare, nothing worked on the days that we were supposed to and so on. So it's good to hear a positive story.
Films are always made that way, Craig. People write and then everything has to fall as a servant to the story that has been written and is written in stone. And I believe it's almost like taking a documentary approach, but why not allow the things that are happening around you to be your ally, not this monster that you have to slay. It's an interesting approach. That doesn't always work. I don't know if you watch TV, but there's a new show called The Studio. It's a Seth Rogen show. Is that the right title? Yeah.
I think it's excellent, yeah.
It's really good.
In the second episode, he's got Sarah Polley there. I love that there's all Canadians in the show. And Catherine O'Hara, Seth Rogen, Sarah Polley. Anyway, so Sarah's doing a oneer in this fancy house, and this shot is all about getting the light and all this stuff. And there's a moment where his idea is to add a little something. It's a joint. He wants to add a little something to the scene. And of course, it turns into this ripple effect of chaos that destroys the moment. I've been thinking a lot about this, Craig. In film crews and on film sets, you have sometimes 100, 150 people. They're all highly skilled professionals. They're all really intelligent. They're all really educated in their craft. No one's going out and attempting to do a bad job. It's the opposite. They're going to do a great job. But because you have 100 people striving for excellence, there's a kind of a level of interference isn't the right word, but everyone's trying to do the best job that they can. But there's so many hands on deck. It's very difficult to have all of that coordinate in a way that goes easily and smoothly. So a passing cloud, a passing plane, a passing bird, a dropped or lost hat. Anything can completely upset the equilibrium of a set that big. But when you're working in this way, you're just floating on the ether, you're floating on the air of whatever's happening, and you're allowing it to kind of be part of...
And those things become your friends. That's where you get the gold. And there's one scene in Field Sketches near the end. It's one of the last shots of the film, and we were driving away. And as we were driving away, it occurred to us that maybe it would be great to have this character appear that we had introduced in the film. Ben Cotton, who was playing Henry Thoreau. What would happen on a normal situation is, Ben wouldn't be there on that day because what we're shooting would just entail myself and another actor. But because everyone was there, we were able to say, it'd be great to have Thoreau in this scene. Ben, go throw on your costume. And he was able to run into the house within 2 or 3 minutes, have his costume on and be back and shooting the scene with us.
Catch the late day light.
Yeah. And it's one of those moments that whenever I see the film and I see him tip his hat as I drive past in the car, I think that is absolute magic. It's one of the most poignant moments at the end of the film. And it wouldn't have existed if we had been working in any other way. It only exists because of the issues that we were fighting against.
You hear about that a lot with films where its adaptation ends up giving birth to the most iconic moments.
Exactly.
Apocalypse Now is one of them where the entire crew were sick and they just made it part of the film. Everybody just looks run down and ill because they actually were, that kind of stuff. The original Star Wars, they had a nightmare filming in the desert.
In Tunisia.
Yeah, it just became part of the movie.
Yeah.
Just that kind of griminess.
Yeah.
It's stuff you can't fake, as good as stuff as like The Volume and so on is. You can't fake some of that, I don't think.
Right, absolutely.
We talk a lot about AI now. Everyone's talking about AI in different ways. There's conversations that are very enthusiastic and there's conversations that are really fear-based. There's a lot of discussion. And I do a bit of teaching as well in the film schools where the students' heads are at. There's a real mix of fear, loathing, and enthusiasm, all matter of ideas. And what I really feel is that, and this is just back to this kind of unplugged concept of filmmaking is sort of deindustrialized filmmaking. As all of the technology gets smarter, faster, better, more sophisticated, there's something about human error, human accident, the goofiness and unpredictability of the human being that is the superpower. Actually, to me, that's the magic. The magic is we actually enjoy mistakes, error. Why do we watch professional sports? Not everyone likes professional sports, but the reason why we watch sport is we want to see excellence. But it's that wonderful line between will they, won't they? Will they succeed? Will they fail? If you had robots running a 100-meter race in perfect stride, all crossing the line in 8.01 seconds or whatever, would anyone go and watch? Is it not the most boring thing in the world? It's human endeavor and human error, the potential for failure, the potential for mistakes, and how wonderful when they overcome the obstacles. That's what we love to see. That's the magic. And I don't think you can make that up with machines. So I think the more we work, the better our work will be when we embrace the human factor, which is magical error, mistakes, the mess.
The mess.
I like that.
It's interesting to hear you talk about AI because it is obviously a hot button topic at the moment and everybody has a different view on it, and I've conflicted views on it as well. I tend to view it as a really good tool, but it shouldn't be replacing anybody. It shouldn't be getting rid of jobs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because AI is in everything. You can say, I don't really use it. Well, that's not true. Your phone's using it right now. This software we're on right now is using it. The editing software I use to cut any movie is using it. I mean, there's so many applications. I've been experimenting in a new project that Vince is also acting in. I've been experimenting with AI as a writing tool, just as part of the satire of the narrative. It's a kind of film essay about many isms, but one of them is this topic of AI. And I get AI to write these little commercial monologues for certain actors in the movie. And they're so good that they become kind of predictable, even though the writing is about a completely different topic. With the right prompts, the structure and style of the writing is so redundant that it's funny. It's lacking the personality and the mess of the human touch, which I'm making fun of in the movie, but I like that. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going away, is it? So we do have to find a way to live with it.
It's not going anywhere.
I think we have to embrace it. But yeah, I think you also can't be threatened by it. Tricky.
So that kind of makes your film more poignant in a way, because it is about that back to basics, rustic humanness, isn't it?
It is, but I also feel like there's a lesson there too, right? I think for Peter in the film, he goes away to try to sort of get his head straight on what matters to him. What's his purpose? We're talking about a middle-aged guy who's had a strong creative career. His character's an architect, which was my kind of stand-in allegorically for filmmaking, was a sort of big industrial creative trade that requires scale in order to be executed, like filmmaking. But he wants to move in the direction of more pure, more simple, more pared down and more artistic. And what he discovers in his architecture practice in the movie is that it's hard to make a living doing that. And that is exactly right. It's exactly right. So for me as a filmmaker, similarly, this thing I'm talking about so lovingly is also a difficult thing to make a living at. So you have to play two streets. You have to, on one hand, be prepared to scale up, to work at a level where there's paychecks for the crew that are respectful and it's a living wage, where there's scale of a degree that gives you the chance to kind of have your movie go out in the world on a bigger level because it's about making a living. Everyone needs to make a living, those jobs you were talking about. And on the other hand, how do you find the artistry when there's, if we go back to Seth Rogen's satire, how do you find the artistry when the joint goes out and they can't film the moment because it all bogs down in the scale and the chaos? He's making fun of it, but it's actually true. Anyone who's worked on films has been on a set where the one little prop that's needed for everything to go bang falls out the window and everything grinds to a halt.
You're talking about that Seth Rogen show, The Studio, about how that's in some ways about the studio execs breathing down the necks of the creatives and wanting things a certain way. It sounds like with this film, you wouldn't have that at all because it was your own project and you were out in the wilderness, basically.
Yeah. I'm more enthusiastic about this way of working creatively, of course, but it's weird how it's kind of all or none, right? People always say, oh, have you thought of sending your film to Netflix? You know, like that somehow I had never occurred to me. It never occurred to me as a filmmaker to talk to Netflix. The last time I could get a meeting with Netflix was in 2006 when they just started. You know, that was the meeting I had with Netflix. I was sitting in Toronto at the film festival at a bar, and I had these two young people came in and we were trying to get a couple $100,000 to finish the financing on this movie we were pitching. And we were desperate. And my producing partner at the time was like, these people, they got this new thing. It's like internet movies. But anyway, I think they're cool. We should meet them. And so we sit down and meet them and the cars come out and it's Netflix. Yeah, right. Probably one of the first people to meet an executive at Netflix. And then when they got started, I had my films on Netflix all the time. But now there's a barrier. There's Netflix that has 70% of the eyeballs in Canada. I don't know about the UK, but they're not buying movies like Field Sketches. And if they do, they're going to pay as little as possible. So these little heartfelt, emotional, and artful, and maybe somewhat experimental films, they don't play in the mainstream, which is why we've sort of moved into the space of taking our own agency and being distributors of our movie, taking it on the road. It's like an old-fashioned dog and pony show. Get in the van, drive to this next city, pull out the film and show it on a sheet.
And that is where film festivals can be very valuable, I think, because I go to the Edinburgh Film Festival every year and it gets films in front of people's eyes that nobody would ever think to watch or might not see traditionally.
It does. But Craig, the festival space is crowded too now, right? I do some volunteering for a couple festivals where I screen films because the volumes are so high. They need people with quote unquote discerning eyes to kind of help. You've probably done some of this. I don't know. But you realize any given festival is getting 5,000 to 10,000 submissions.
How do you go through that?
Yeah, how do you pick 100 films or 150 films?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So Edinburgh would get 5,000 easy because it's a great festival. So what's the way in which those discerning programmers pick? So it becomes a popularity contest to some extent where the films that have had traction in other festivals get a favored view. If your film doesn't come out of the Toronto Film Festival or Sundance or Berlin or Cannes, you're automatically behind a category of movies. I just find, you think about it from a business model, people spend $100 every time they submit to a film festival and they go out and they submit to 50 film festivals and they get into one. That's a lot of money you're handing out. And think about a film festival, do the math. If you get 10,000 submissions and everyone pays $100 to submit their film, you can send polite form letters saying, thank you, that was wonderful. We really respect you and your career. Go fuck yourself. And you make $50,000 to $100,000. You haven't shown a movie. Weird business. I'm not that into it.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a good perspective to get, and the grassroots way is good too. We used to have the Film House in Edinburgh, which is supposed to be reopening at some point, but they would sometimes get these very director-driven projects where they're not getting any distribution and things. I ended up at the Student Showcase where they did their shorts a couple of years in a row, and again, it was just a way to get these things seen.
Yeah.
These places are dwindling, but they still exist, I suppose.
I actually think that there is a bit of space now. Maybe it's the generation. I find with the students I teach, anything analog, they're really into. They get really excited by old film. They really get interested in still photography, celluloid. They're really getting back to cinemas. They like to go to these art house, one-off show night of a particular. It's quite popular, right? So I feel like there are these spaces. And instead of just getting in line at a film festival, say you get into a film festival, like I'll just use my city as an example. So you can send your film into the Vancouver Film Festival. It's a big festival. They get great audiences. A lot of people will see your movie. So you send it in, they pick you, which is a miracle because they've got 5,000 submissions. So we've talked about that. But anyway, you get in and you're excited. So what do you get? Get, say, two, maybe three, two shows, say. Those shows, you hustle all your friends in and your cast and crew and you're bowing and you're taking bouquets and you're doing Q&As and it's really fun and you get some drink tickets and you might get invited to a party. But all those people you hustled in to see your movie, that's your audience. They all see it at the festival. And then you go, you think, okay, my film was a hit and I won all these prizes and people love me. I'm going to take it out into the theaters now. Crickets, man. It's frogs in the audience because you burn that audience up. They all came to the festival. It was a great time. So with Field Sketches, we skipped that. So we went to the same theater that the Vancouver Film Festival plays their festival films at, which is a gorgeous 200-seat theater, beautiful seats, amazing projection, great sound, great lobby. And it's not like a trashy
mall
popcorn BS theater. It's like going to the theater. It's an art house.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Glorious experience. We hustle all our friends and family and all these people. And guess what, Craig? The people who run the bricks and mortar building, they take 50%, and the other 50% goes to me and Vince. And so what me and Vince do is we then take our money and we buy our plane tickets or whatever we need to go to the next city and take our film and show it. We're not getting rich here, Craig.
Definitely not getting rich, but it's very satisfying.
It's a beautiful experience. It's really something. This is what happens with festivals sometimes. I remember getting a film semi-recent, a couple of years ago, big festival in LA, super excited. Great brand, looks good on the poster, but you go down and you think that the festival's going to do some marketing or whatever, and you realize they're not. And you go there and you got your friends and your crew and your people, anyone you can hustle in, you get into the theater, and it's just kind of disappointing. And you just feel like if you'd known, you would have done something else.
The only people seeing it are the people that were in it almost.
Yeah. Edinburgh is a great festival. In Vancouver too. Festivals that actually have big audiences. That's very satisfying. But you have to think about it from a business point of view. Like, what's it actually do for your movie? Edinburgh, I can tell you what it does. It's a great brand. People will see your movie. Probably it could lead to good distribution. I think it's a good festival.
And you get to put that nice stamp on your poster.
90% of the festivals out there, it's bullshit. You're just churning for these people to make fees and you're not getting a piece of the action. And so what's the point?
That example you were talking about actually happened with the Robert the Bruce movie with Angus McFadden in it. It premiered, I think, at Edinburgh.
Oh, that's right.
And then people were lobbying a multiplex to screen it after the festival, or maybe it was during the festival. And then the multiplex took it on and it didn't sell many tickets. And it's like, that's why we didn't take it, because we knew we wouldn't get that many people watching it. So yeah, there was these screenings that were just empty that this multiplex took on. I don't know how they did it to prove a point. It was just an interesting example.
That old scenario, we used to go with films to theater spaces, and what you had to do is you had to outcompete a Hollywood movie in order to hold the theater.
Impossible.
So you try, right? So we'd go in and you'd start on a Thursday and you'd have till Sunday. So it's really Friday, Saturday are your key screenings, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they tally up those tickets. And if you've outcompeted whatever, the Steve Martin movie next door, you're in, you get to stay. It's tough. So why not just admit that most of these director-driven boutique art house films belong in art houses, because they kind of do. Look, I love my friend Vince sitting next to me, but Vince is not a box office draw. He's not a hunky Hollywood star that everyone knows firsthand. He's an excellent actor and an interesting man, and he delivers as a star would, a great performance. He's engaging, he's charismatic, all of that stuff.
But no one is showing up at the multiplex on a Tuesday night to see a film that I'm in.
No, and
nobody.
But why pretend? That just feels really like, how naive are we? Vince and I are old men now, right? We kind of know our audience. So if I go to a city where I have a few contacts and I can create an event that feels like a festival event in a venue where I can share the revenues with the venue owner, they win, I win, no one loses. We have an interesting cultural evening. That's the kind of thing I'm interested in for films like this. Don't pretend it belongs in a multiplex. Just, you can't compete.
And a multiplex, by and large, exists inside of a mall.
Yeah,
it's the same as an Aldo or a Sainsbury's. It's just selling a product. It's selling a can of tuna fish or mayonnaise in the same, or it's selling a shirt the same way that a store is. That's all.
I mean, one of our cities,
mall theater.
One of our cities, we're doing it like a cabaret because I've got contacts in the city. So does Vince, and the people who did the music and the film live in this city. And so we're going to do more of a cabaret where the musicians are playing as well. And there's a bar, and it's just a different kind of event. So you have a screening, but you kind of think, well, what would make this a fun night for people to come out and spend the $15 or whatever? You just have to think a little creatively. And it's not easy. It takes a little time, and people are busy, and we're struggling with time and money and space. But it's just an experiment, Craig. And I feel like art is about experimentation and exploration. And I think that we have to challenge.
At its best.
Yeah, but we have to challenge these conventions 100%. Of filmmaking distribution. And even, I mean, I talked about it earlier about the deindustrialized idea, but how do you make films in a market and a climate where nobody wants your movie because Tom Cruise isn't in it or whomever? You know, it's a good question. When I go to the Berlin or Cannes markets and I'm pitching my project, people don't even care if the script is good. If you don't have the right name in the movie, they don't even want to talk to you. So to me, that's fine. That's one kind of filmmaking. Is there not another kind of filmmaking? That's all.
It's a complicated industry, to say the least. And I think it is important that these boutique indie cinemas hang around. It was a big shame when the film house closed in Edinburgh, because you would get those sorts of events, but they couldn't keep the lights on because those kind of events don't necessarily make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's been happening worldwide, really, hasn't it, with a lot of these indie places?
Yes, absolutely.
Some of these theaters in Canada are certainly built on the back of government support. So you've got these cinemas, I'm talking about cultural venues where the bricks and mortar was built and supported by investment from the taxpayers, essentially. So when that's the situation, I sort of feel like, okay, you guys have this theater because of us, so you should play some of our work. You just should. And then they think, well, yeah, you're right. And then they do. And then if you show up and you don't bring anyone and no one comes and it's like 2 people in the theaters, yeah, they've got people to pay. They've got overhead to pay. They're not making anything because you didn't do any of your homework. But it seems to me like that's what I love about the VIFF. VIFF is the Vancouver Film Festival, but it's also the VIFF Center, which is a film organization that runs the program year round. So it's got the art house theatrical year round venue, but it also parts out into the festival. I'm differentiating between the two, but it's the same organization. But they have a very thoughtful programmer who understands that if he can take field sketches for 2 nights, it's worth it for him because he knows we'll bring an audience. He goes and takes one of my friend's films. He runs an acting school here in Vancouver. The guy's got really great, deep relationships with the acting community in the city. So when his film plays, guess who shows up? 500 actors from the community. And so his screenings get sold out. And these are not films that are household names or they've not won awards on the circuit particularly. They're just boutique films, but they perform not forever. They just perform nicely for a few nights and then move on.
Do you find that audiences might be looking for things that are a bit different? Because I certainly know that I get burned out from a lot of these mediocre to bad, really high budget films and feel like I want to see something a bit more rustic almost, or just something that's good, something that someone has actually put some thought into.
I think you're absolutely right, because as I sent this film around to family and friends and people whose opinion I valued, the overwhelming feedback that I got was how refreshing it was to see such an honest, pared down piece of art.
And I think general audiences had that experience with, say, Oppenheimer last year, didn't they? Where it was, oh yeah, I forgot that films could actually be good in this way.
Yeah.
Because there had been so many high budget, well, that was all right, or that wasn't great sort of experiences.
It's interesting that the population, people in general, are weirdly educated by Hollywood about scale and the importance of scale. There's a little game that they play. It's the marketing game, which is to sort of equate quality with scale. So big means it's going to be good. And then they saturate you with ads. And then they remind you that if you recognize these famous people and the scale is good, it's a pretty good shot. You're going to be well entertained. So this equation between quality and scale. And I think people are starting to wake up to the ruse of that's just a little bit of snake oil. That's not really true. The new Tom Cruise film, The Last of the Endless Mission Impossibles. I will say this about Tom Cruise. He does his own stunts and you're going to get some adrenaline entertainment. If that's what you're into, It will deliver. It will. So I'll probably go because there are elements of that I always find kind of engaging. But the stories are puerile and nonsense, and I don't go for my intellect. And personally, I don't know about you, Craig, but I'm a reader. I'm a thoughtful guy, and 90% of what I watch, I want to be moved by thoughtful cinema. That's what I'm interested in. And it's even better to see those thoughtful films in even a small audience. I mean, the audience experience is wonderful. People love that.
I love the Mission Impossible movies, but at the same time, if you held a gun to my head, I wouldn't be able to tell you what any of them were actually about, what the story was. Is that the one where Tom Cruise hung off a plane? Is that one?
Yeah, but he's actually doing this stuff, which is so cool. I have to say respect. He's years old and he's dropping out of planes and he's riding motorcycles off cliffs. Come on, this is serious. This guy's for real. He can't even get insurance. He's so risk-oriented. I have respect. That's cool.
Again, you're going to bang on like Carl about the commercialization of the art. My mother, for instance, she doesn't even understand that when she sees, we'll just use Tom Cruise because he's become the stand-in for every movie star. But my mom doesn't understand when she sees Tom Cruise on the cover of a magazine that he's selling the film that he's in. She thinks he's on the cover of the magazine because he's so handsome and he's so famous and he's infinitely fascinating and she wants to read about him. And I've actually had to explain to her that no, he's there because he's selling this product that he hopes you're going to go watch. Or it's not even he hopes, it's the studio that's financed it to the tune of $200 or $300 million because that's what these things cost now with print and advertising.
Yeah, and I think the audience fatigue, for want of a better word, is being reflected in the receipts, isn't it? A lot of these high-budget films aren't doing very well anymore.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
But at the same time, I have a colleague, he started a course. He wanted to teach a course on indie, ultra low budget filmmaking because he did a small film and he felt like there's such a niche here. So he designed this course and he's had trouble getting young people to register for this course. And I think to myself, why is that? Because I don't think people really aspire to make cell phone movies, that somehow this is the career goal. I don't think people wake up and go, I want to be a low budget filmmaker. It's not a very sexy aspiration,
as evidenced by us sitting here.
But I don't frame it by budget. I frame it by artistic agency. I kind of feel like it's not really about the budget, the scale. I'm interested in hearing honestly what Vince has to say. And I think Vince is interested in hearing honestly what I have to say. Neither of us are all that interested in being told what to say by these money powers up here who have no prior experience artistically that makes any sense to us.
Right, but it's very interesting that, Carl, that you say when this course description went out that people weren't as interested in it because Vancouver, Craig, I don't know whether you know much about Vancouver as a television service industry, but it's a huge one.
I know a fair bit because I've interviewed a lot of people that have appeared in all of the shows that were setting up shop in Vancouver, doing the rounds.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a huge service industry here. And when you are talking with people in your community, if I'm talking with different actors and they'll ask you what you're doing and you'll say, oh, I've got a job on Stargate, for instance. And the first question, there's one question that every actor will ask you. It's not who are you playing? What is your character doing? They'll say, how many days do you have? That's all that matters to them. That's the only question they care about. How many days have you got? Because by asking you that question, they can then figure out how much money you're making. So it's got nothing to do with the role you're playing, how pivotal that role is. You could have a great character and be working one day, but you'll see it in people's faces. If you say, oh, I've got one day, it's like, oh, that's too bad. All they care about is the bank. They just care about how many days can you put together, because if you've got 10 days, that means you're making $20,000. That's all it becomes.
There's an amazing story about, do you remember the film The Revenant? You must remember Revenant. I was working on a terrible TV movie and my hairstylist for that movie, a man, was booked to go on to The Revenant. This is a great director. This guy was very excited. And he ended up getting on the Oscar-winning team for this work. So as soon as The Revenant called, everyone that could dropped whatever they were doing and went, right? And so there was this actor from Vancouver who booked a role, a speaking part, but minor speaking part. But he plays in the BG in that company of kind of scraggy men.
Tom Hardy and Domhnall.
He's got like the buffalo jacket and he's kind of a littleish guy and he's sort of tucked in the background. But anyway, because he's part of this ensemble, he was almost like an extra just bumping along. And you know the stories of The Revenant and how grotesquely over budget it went and how they ran out of snow in Canada. So they went to Chile. It was endless, right? So this dude who was saying like 3 lines in the movie gets dragged on this grand tour of the world. And he comes away, he had his little day rate. Everyone else is on a picture rate because they're above the line and they're making a flat rate for the movie. The movie goes on forever. This dude was making his union scale plus a whatever day rate, but he ends up making a small fortune.
Absolute fortune.
And these are legendary stories in our city because you just slip into the background somewhere doing nothing particularly important, but somehow you come out with $500,000. What? It's a great tale. But none of that has to do with where you hang your hat at the end of your life. What is it that you really feel proud of? Vince did, for example, did a reading of a play. Wasn't even a fully produced play. Him and two other performers got together. They hosted this play reading in a little motel room in this soon-to-be demoed motel that sits in the center of the city. But before they demo it and turn it into condos, they've allowed artists to use the spaces, these rooms, for studios. So Vince's wife, who was also part of the company, has a studio in which they used. And so it's this little motel room that they kitted out with some light, and it was just stuffed with chairs, and there was a little table, and it was a Pinter play.
It was a Pinter piece, and you could only fit 20 people at night in the room.
So they had a little cash box at the door, a little pay-what-you-can station. You come in, they pour you a glass of wine, and you sit down, and then the play begins. And it was like being at dinner with actors in a play. It was an hour. The play is quite short, and it was just an incredible artistic experience. And it was one of the best theater experiences I've had in the city, and it lacked all of the usual trappings of production
Right.
value. And
no proscenium arch, no curtain, no sound.
I just think these are the ideas that make art special and make it original. AI can't fuck this up in any way. Just a magical place. And I think that rather than frame it as, oh, I don't have any money, no one wants to fund my movies, I'm going to just pull out my cell phone and damn them all, this sort of rebellious, which it is. There's a rebellion there, I suppose. But I think of it as it's a privilege to go out with my quite beautiful camera that I use and quite beautiful lenses that I use and photograph these very interesting actors exploring with me a narrative that is made with care, attention to detail, love. And then when we play this movie, you don't sit there and go, oh, what a hackneyed, low budget tragedy. What am I doing here? You're watching a movie. You don't care about how much it cost or didn't cost. You don't care about how famous this person is or isn't. Once you're there and you're watching the movie, you just get immersed in the movie.
Which is the other thing that I should add. Carl he's a great writer and director, but he's also an extraordinary cinematographer. And so when you're in the middle of a scene, you're in the middle of the scene with Carl. His camera, his eye is like another character in the scene with you. And that's also what's really exciting about working this way, is that you get to collaborate, not just abstractly, you get to collaborate in the middle of the scene with your director. So it's almost like he's an actor in the scene with you.
In the film essay, which is the new project I'm working on, the one I'm still editing right now, because I teach at a film school. It's a film school in Vancouver called Capilano. It's a university, and they have these really incredible studios. It's a very kitted out film school. I've been to a lot of film schools. This film school has great gear. And because I teach there, I get to use whatever I want, whenever it's available. So I took in one of the studios and I had crafted these ideas, very kind of hybrid of documentary and fiction. So I wrote things, but there was a lot of play in the studio. And I had Vince playing a character who's essentially another kind of satirical stand-in for my own life. So this time he's a guy who used to make art house cinema, but has decided that it's all bullshit and he can't sell out. He's going to sell out. He'd rather just fully sell out. So all he makes is commercials because he feels like they're at least being honest. They don't pretend not to be selling something. They're just selling something. So this is his whole philosophy. And at one point, I wanted him to interact with this girl who's in the commercial, who's another character in the movie. And we had this big discussion because I really wanted him to just unload his anger at her for interfering in his process. But in so doing, he would kind of break down into this confessional about how terrible it is to compromise one's artistic values as a commercial director. And it was just all kind of improvised. And I'm filming this guy and he's breaking down about his sellout, the sellout that he's done. I was just so happy when I'm filming that stuff, because it was just happening in front of my eyes. And when I look at the scene in the edit, it's so great. It's so unadorned. You know what I mean, Craig? There isn't a manufacturing of performance through all these vis effects and all this fanciness and all this scale. We didn't have copious of this and copious of that. It's just a pared down performance in a dead space, in a neutral space by a great actor, discovering something real in the moment. I mean, what do you want?
You were talking about the lack of uptake on that low budget film course. Do you maybe think the hunger for that sort of filmmaking comes later in someone's career? They may start off wanting to make bigger budget things that people will see and then maybe gravitate to being more artistically true to themselves, I suppose.
I just think you got to frame things as the excitement of having artistic agency is a more attractive pitch to me than no money, garbage camera. Like I use as good equipment on my small film as I would on a big film. Why wouldn't you? Everyone who's in the cinema space knows this, but the price point for excellent equipment has gone down, 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 down. This is one of the reasons why there's so many films out there. Getting a camera and getting a great lens, it's not film anymore, right? It's just media. You're just recycling media all day long. That's not your problem. It's easy to get. The problem is great performance, great story. Probably the order would be great story, great performance. Yeah. Those are the two. I'm going to keep going back to your superpower question. But to me, that's the only thing that is ultimately important in a movie, I think. I always go back to this idea because it's what inspired my career, man. My first movie I made on the back of watching The Celebration by Thomas Vinterberg. I was so floored by that movie. That movie was ghastly from a cinematography point of view. But in a way, it wasn't. This is Dodd Mantle. This is a great cinematographer. Yeah. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize story and acting. And the camera, in its pared down simplicity, it was a very low-end digital camera iteration from 98. I mean, we're talking about digital video garbage. It's not even HD. I mean, it was terrible. But it's so bad, it's good. It's hard to say it any other way. I marvel at that movie, and I love that movie. And I rewatched it recently because I thought, well, maybe I won't think it's that good anymore.
It still is.
It's as good today, maybe better than it was in its moment. And I just think, wow, do you learn a lot from that film?
And it definitely sounds like that's what your current film is about. I've tried to make the money. I've tried to do it this way. Now I want to do something personally fulfilling and more honest to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite filmmakers is Ken Loach. Working with Carl, when we work together, I always think, I feel like I'm in a Ken Loach film. The greatest compliment, because that's what I care about.
I think we both want to be in a Ken Loach film. That's great.
You see it happen the other way as well, where someone does a couple of indie films that play well at festivals and suddenly they're in front of a $200 million movie and it's overwhelming, I guess.
I worked for a long time until she retired with a wonderful casting director from New York. Suzanne Smith Crowley was her name. And she cast a ton of really big movies. And I remember having this argument with her. I used to love John C. Reilly. John C. Reilly was, in his earlier iteration, such an independent film guy, beautiful actor, and not a conventionally attractive Hollywood type guy. He was a New York actor, something interesting about him. Anyway, I remember when he did Step Brothers, and I was like, Suzanne, why would he do that? My kids loved it. They loved that film. But him and Will Ferrell acting like these puerile morons, I just couldn't understand it. Why would this great independent actor? And she says, Carl, it's everything he's worked for. And now he gets that payout. It sets him up for an entire future of consistent earnings. And this is the biz. This is what people do. I know Denis Villeneuve from the festival circuit and from just being kind of the same age in indie film circles. And we've had conversations at times in Cannes and different places. And I mean, I really admire him. And I've always really, really loved his work, especially his work when he was a Quebec indie film director, Maelstrom, Polytechnique, which is an amazing film. And then when I read his article where he was talking about how stoked he was about where his career's gone now, he's a Hollywood director, I realized that his true passion and what he'd wanted to do his whole life
to work at that scale
was to make Hollywood movies, to make these big, magnificent Hollywood movies. I didn't know that about him because the height of it to me is to go to Cannes and play an artistic film.
I think Maelstrom, how does it get any better than Maelstrom?
I agree. But everyone's got their goal, their thing. When I look at Dune, it's crafted beautifully. And again, lots of respect for Denis, but I just don't need to see another great epic scale battle of robots fighting each other in the desert. I just don't care at all.
Arrival's my favorite of his films. I think it's wonderful.
Very good.
Yes, it's very, very good.
And he's amazing. for sure.
And you mentioned Seth Rogen earlier with the studio. His career seems to have gone on a bit of a bell curve in a way, as in he became well known for the stoner comedy stuff, and now he seems to be trying to get taken more seriously and doing more serious projects. So stuff like the studio, where he's kind of satirizing his own career, I suppose, in some ways, as much as anything.
Yeah, I think that's a legit thing to say.
And I think the work that he's doing in the studio is beautiful.
Yeah, I love it.
It's satire, but at the same time, what he's doing in front of the camera is not easy to do. He's writing a couple of lines there and he's able to send stuff up, but he's also able to pull us in as an audience and remind us about the humanity underneath all of that. And I think he does it really extraordinary.
I haven't watched the whole season yet, but I'm hoping he gets Denis Villeneuve in there. I love it. He's got this sort of love of his Canadian fellows who he sort of showcases in the show. I like that.
Well, it's getting a season 2, so there's plenty of opportunity to...
Oh, they've already announced season 2?
Yeah, they announced it the other day, so it'll be getting another season. I think I've seen the whole season. If there's only 8 episodes, I've seen the whole season.
Oh, you have? I watched one last night, the one called Golden Globes.
That might be the last one, although I'm not sure.
Oh, no, really?
Might be.
Oh, no, I hope not.
That kind of comes back to what you were saying earlier about the Vancouver service industry in terms of actors moving through these different projects. Do you find it with these smaller orders for episodes on TV series and things that it's maybe a bit more difficult to come by? I'm a big fan of a lot of the stuff the CW were doing. I know you were in Supernatural a few times, for example, Vince, and it's one of those things where it just seemed like there was just so much stuff going on for such a long time, but now the network TV model is winding down or has wound down massively. So is it more hard to come by now?
Oh, to come by work?
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily difficult to come by work at the moment. Although it's interesting that you say that, Craig. I'm not sure that it's because of the winding down of traditional television. From my perspective, it seems to have come out of the new protocols that came into place after the pandemic. So now you never meet anyone in person. Everything is done through these things called self-tapes. So everyone in the world now has as much chance of being seen for a project as anyone else, which is democratization of the business. But at the same time, I've discovered that I was a person who got jobs because of the relationships that I made when I met people. They liked what I did with the scene, but they also thought, oh, I actually like this person. I'd like to work with them. I'd like to collaborate with them. And so I'm having a really hard time navigating this new paradigm in the business personally. So yeah, huge downtick for me. It's a new playing field.
Yeah, it seems like there's more projects than ever getting made, but there's also less of these guaranteed 22 episode a year type situations where there's going to be lots of opportunities to get cast in different things.
Yeah, no, I mean, 22, it's like that.
Well, to me personally, my appetite for series mostly leans toward the limited kind.
Right.
I like the sort of Ripley's where there's a beginning and an end. I get a little jaded when something keeps rolling forward into comedy. Works pretty well in multi-seasons, but I get particularly bored when drama cycles. My wife loves procedurals, so that's her thing, but give me an ending, man.
You know what I thought was an exception to that rule was The Americans. Did you watch that show?
No.
Yeah, I've seen some of it. Yeah, I've not seen all of it, but some of it. It's very good.
It's pretty extraordinary. I think it goes 5 seasons, and episode 2, season 1 is as strong as episode 13, season 5.
I miss the good old days. I mean, they're not even that old, but of episodic television where you watch an episode of something and it doesn't necessarily have to feed into some larger thing. It's just they're making 22 of them a year, so they're just experimenting and playing around with different things. I mentioned Supernatural. Supernatural was great for that. There was nothing they wouldn't have a go at.
Yeah, it's true.
And plenty of actors I've spoken to have said that when that ended, it was a big loss because it was almost a rite of passage in Vancouver to appear in Supernatural at some point.
Yeah, it's true.
There was a fellow father of a kid on my son's soccer team at the time, and we would stand around the side of the field. He was in the paint department of Supernatural.
Oh, yeah, right.
This guy had 20 seasons or something. How many? 10, 15, 20 years he was working.
Yeah, I think it was
I said, how many people in the paint department? Usually around 20. I'm like thinking about my movies and my life, and now the crews are getting smaller. Got 20 people in the paint department. I just was like, what world is this?
Complicated industry is, I think, what we keep coming back to.
It is.
One thing I definitely like to ask, Carl, you've directed some might say legends like Ian McKellen and Carrie Ann Moss and so on. What was it like working with them? I can imagine working with Ian McKellen must have been quite something with his theatrical background.
Ian, to this day, he's actually a reference for me when I was first looking to get teaching positions or whenever I have to apply for something. Ian's my go-to character reference. I saw him most recently in England when he was doing a theater play. He's amazing. We started working together when he was still in his 60s, so it's a long time. And I marvel at his energy and his enthusiasm. And in a way, I feel like he kind of spoiled me a little bit in the sense that he was so generous and so easy to work with, so much fun to work with. I just assumed all famous people were like that. And you realize it's a moving target. It's a different thing, depends on the person, of course. And you have this kind of complicated relationship because on one hand, you need to have this person in your film in order for the financiers to be on board. So you spend a lot of time with Carrie Ann, for example. I spent so much time and energy getting to know all the people around her to get her to be in the movie. By the time I meet her, I have this relationship with these lawyers and managers and agents and all these people, but Carrie Ann and I are kept from one another for the longest time. And then your actual shooting schedule is not that long. They're always trying to thin it out as much as possible. For this much money, you can have this much time. And that's counterintuitive because in a way what you want is you want more time. You need more time. With Ian, I was sort of spoiled with this long, slow gestation period of conversation and time spent developing the script. With Bruce Dern, I had that same experience where I just had the luxury of conversation and time and getting to understand what's this guy like and what's he into and how does he work. And when that happens, it's magical. When you get thrust into a situation where it's 6 days when done and in and out, you're spending the first 3 days just trying to work out the conversation.
Right. You know what's interesting about what you're saying, though, Carl, when I think about it, is that when you first worked with Ian McKellen, he wasn't a star. He was on the way up. I mean, he was a star on the British stage and very well known, but to world audiences, that was that first X-Men film.
Well, it wasn't. He had one.
He had one, and it was the second.
Lord of the Rings, the first film that had come out.
That's right.
So he was kind of a newly anointed.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
He's someone that became really famous when he was very old, rather than being consistently really famous throughout his career.
Yeah, you're right. I had forgotten about Lord of the Rings.
It was Gandalf, right? He always loved the X-Men films. And I love this about Ian. He had a very charismatic and thoughtful way of describing what it was he saw in each of the projects that he did. He's not someone who ever does something because he says, I need the money. He does something because he sees how his voice can travel in this project. And his pitch about the X-Men films, he loved the way the X-Men films were this thinly veiled metaphor for being a gay man in a society that was pretty intolerant when he was growing up. He stayed in the closet forever.
He helped shape the coming out scene in X-Men 2, which was obviously the allegory of being a mutant rather than being gay. It was the "have you tried not being a mutant" response. He helped shape that.
Yeah, right.
He's an amazing man and he's got a great voice and it's really an honor to just know him.
Yeah, and he can still do full runs of Hamlet in his 80s on stage.
Yeah, how incredible is that?
We should all be so lucky. If I can be half as active when I'm 20 years younger than him, that'll be good.
For sure. Famous actors, they're the blood of the film biz. The name actors is the essence of any film getting financed, any film getting seen. It's problematic because you can spend a lot of time in that trough of chasing. And I guess I'm impatient these days. I find myself, I just prefer to do the work. I mean, Vince and I have had a conversation for 2 years now that just keeps rolling forward into more filmmaking. And it's never about anything other than the ideas and the art. And it's so great. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
And do you find that these bigger actors, these famous actors, sometimes take a pay cut to go into the smaller movies?
Well, they have to, really. And that's never such a big problem for them as it is for their people.
Business managers and lawyers and agents and managers.
You realize that there's a huge stone wall with spurs and broken glass that surrounds this camp of famous people. Like, so often they don't even know that there's a project out there. You've been knocking on this door and begging, please, making these and trying to get someone involved in a movie. And you find out later, once they do it, they end up, I read it by accident because my costume person had a copy and la la la. The door is never direct.
Yeah.
I sort of find it really odd, but that's their job. It's the scarcity model, Craig. If you keep things scarce, then you keep people away, you build value. And that's what Hollywood has always done. And that's what the agencies in Hollywood do. And if you want to play in that sandbox, you got to have a lot of tenacity and patience.
And some actors are strategic about it as well. They'll do the big roles so they can save up money and then do the smaller ones. Andrew Garfield did Spider-Man a couple of times and then set himself up for life so he could do whatever he wanted. And
yeah, exactly.
Robert Pattinson was the same. He did all the Twilight movies so he could then do weirder stuff.
And when you see him in that amazing Safdie Brothers film, Good Time, that's a great story. Those are the stories we independent filmmakers kind of live for. You hear about he saw one of their earlier films and he tracked them down. It's like the Isabella Rossellini story on Guy Madden. She saw Heart of the World at TIFF and she was like, I got to work with this guy. But not every artist has that expressive, passionate, slightly crazy nature where they go out of their way to find the person who's behind the lens of this interesting project. So often they're in the hands of management, and management wants stepbrothers. Agents, they don't want John C. Reilly getting all caught up in
with Carl Bessai.
Dirty word, the dirty art word. It's like in Seth's show, the Bryan Cranston character. Now, before I give you this job, I just want to check on one thing. I've heard that you're into these art house. Tell me that's not true. I mean, he's making fun, but it's
amazing. They're making Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and you see all the compromising that goes on as well as they go on. It seems that Seth Rogen's character starts off as being this beacon of art, and then he keeps compromising as he goes, and he keeps giving up bits and bits. The AI discussion came up, and it's like, well, you're going to just use it for the stuff no one cares about, aren't you? That's fine, that's fine. He's convincing himself to play the game.
I love how Seth Rogen has become a major character in our interview.
Yeah, I know. Didn't see that coming.
I think that in a pop culture way, he's wrestling with these ideas.
Yeah,
and I think
100%,
that's cool.
100%.
I think that's cool.
He's
bringing those ideas into the mainstream. I think everyone loves to kind of peek behind the curtain of famous people and the way shows get made, the way films get made.
There was a similar show, The Franchise, that was on with Richard Grant, and that was a similar idea of, it was more about the filming of one specific thing, but it's the lunacy of adapting something, and are we going to piss off the fans with this?
Did you watch the whole thing, Craig?
The Franchise, yeah, I watched all of it.
And was it satisfying? I watched the pilot and I think the second episode, but that's as much as I got through. I liked it.
I really liked it. I love a lot of franchise stuff. Like I said, I watch a bit of everything, but I love franchise stuff. And I'm not ignorant to the behind the scenes nonsense that goes on in a lot of these things where it's, we've decided to change this last minute, so we're just going to reshoot this bit and we don't have any time to do it, that kind of stuff. So I think it was very true in that respect. And I think Richard E. Grant being involved in some of that in his career maybe adds that authenticity as well.
He was wonderful in it too.
Yeah. So it does seem like there's an appetite for shining a light on that deconstruction, understanding how the sausage is made, so to speak, for good or for bad.
Yeah, although I recently have a friend who is a famous television star in the United States, who's a Canadian who went to the broadcaster here is CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It's like the BBC in Britain. And this friend of mine went to the corporation with a project that was about pulling back the curtain on the industry. And he was told nobody's interested in seeing that. The public, they're not interested in that inside track at all.
Canadians, they only get it when someone else tells them that it's funny. Okay, right. I remember going, this is an embarrassing story. My editor at the time, who became quite famous because he did Neil Blomkamp film in South Africa, District 9, and he got an Oscar nomination, so I could no longer afford to hire him. But he was an amazing guy, and we would make these films together, and he would always talk about zombie films. He loved zombie films. And George A. Romero, Carl, you got to watch this. You got to watch this. He just beat me down. And so finally, together, we wrote a zombie picture, which was super fun. And he edited it, and it was great. And then we had so much fun doing this zombie film. He said, look, I got these books, these graphic novels I've been reading. You got to read these. This would be an amazing show.
Walking Dead.
And he gave me the first 3 books of The Walking Dead. Only the first 3 had come out. And I read these and I agreed. I thought, this is incredible. So I started trying to make calls and see what was going on. It was already locked up. But I went to my domestic, as in Canadian pay channel at the time. These were legit funders of shows. They could greenlight a show, not a big show, but they could greenlight a show. And I'm pitching with a movie I've already done so they can see the aesthetic. And the movie was, in its day, huge success. So I've got this movie, I've got these books that I can't get the rights to, but I wanted to riff on the idea of a sort of realist zombie apocalypse show. And the woman at the executive at the time, she just looks at me, she's like, nobody wants to watch a series about zombies. It was so great. It was so flat out. Are you insane?
Yeah.
How many seasons later?
Yeah, exactly.
So classic.
Exactly.
It's almost like hearing about the record companies that didn't sign the Beatles when they were doing the rounds.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. You hear this shit all the time. Some people, especially bureaucrats, which is the way our broadcast system works here, it's very bureaucratic. It's funded by the government. So you tend to have people in these positions who just don't have vision. They just can't see out into the distance very well. And so they greenlight a lot of imitative bullshit. And then it's after the fact.
The deconstruction stuff has always been popular. I mean, the Scream movies, for example, they shine a light on the horror tropes and make people think about them, make general audiences think about them. So there is always an appetite for understanding how something works, because understanding that can change your relationship with it in a really positive way.
Yeah, Lost in Oblivion, Ed Wood, all these films.
Oh, Lost in Oblivion. I haven't seen that in so long.
Great.
It's so good.
Yeah, so it's not a new thing, but I think there's a lot of talk about big films experiencing reshoots and lots of behind-the-scenes troubles and various things, so it makes sense that someone would want to just make a show about, show this happening and how it works from the studio side, from the people making it side. In the studio, you had Olivia Wilde stealing her own reel of film because she wanted to reshoot the ending or something, because she would never get the money for it otherwise, that kind of stuff.
That's right.
Spoilers for the studio if people haven't seen it.
Yeah, don't,
oh, yes,
don't
right,
tell
of
me
course.
anymore.
Yeah. I won't keep you guys much longer. I could talk to you all night about the film industry, but in terms of the film that we're actually here to talk about, do you have any anecdotes from set that might be funny or meaningful in some way?
My feelings about the movie, they're so intimate and personal and familial. I don't feel that it's so funny as it's poignant. I was thinking about the way we use the passport, my father's old passport, in the actual movie. We used the letter that was written back to the family from Europe as he was talking about his journey to get the grandmother. We used that stuff in the movie. The books in the old farmhouse on this little shelf in this little room are the German books my grandfather brought from Europe. They're still sitting there, all dusty. There's something about being able to make a film where the props and the elements that are in the movie are these iconic pieces of your real personal history. We filmed in the graveyard where my father's actually buried because it has symbolic and personal value to me. It means nothing to anyone else. But when you're a filmmaker touching on your own history, not in an indulgent way, but just in a private and a personal kind of way, it's incredibly raw and beautiful and poignant. And it's an experience I'll never be able to have again.
It's creativity 101, isn't it? Write what you know.
Yeah.
'Cause you can't write about anything else. Not well, anyway.
It's just a joy to have actors come to my sandbox with the skill and also the enthusiasm and the subtlety to tell the stories with me, to shape the stories with me. Because he has that superpower. All I keep thinking about is the superpower. I feel like my superpower is being able to tap into the things that are there around me. There's a kind of magic in the air, and you feel it and you see it and you hear it and you touch it. You bring it into the movie. You build it into the narrative. I mean, I've been working on this for 20 years, trying to be a better listener because I'm a terrible listener. I'm talking all the time. But this is a kind of aspect of listening that I'm working on.
Right.
Let your lens receive these messages that are building around you. We needed a particular house for Vince's character to start his journey in. We wanted him to be an architect. We wanted to have a house that said something about the philosophy and ideology of his architecture, where he comes from, what his pure practice is. And for an architect, it's often the place that you build for your own life, the house that you make that you're going to live in. So we wanted that to be a special place. And just by accident, we found this West Coast modern historical building that's a post and beam out in the West Coast. There's a lot of this sort of 50s and 60s post and beam designs that are still around. They're very sought after and they're very beautiful. And
they're all glass and wood.
very gorgeous. The house was there, and the woman was the granddaughter of the architect who built it in the late 1950s.
Pratt House.
Yeah, the Pratt House, and pitched her on how important this building would be to define our character or whatever. And she just got on board and let us come in and shoot the film in this house. And because I promised a very low footprint, quiet, simple approach to filming there and letting it be very natural. And these kinds of things, it's just hard for them to happen when you march around with giant trucks and diesel generators and bodies everywhere and people carelessly stomping on the gardens. It's tricky to be respectful and nuanced when you make industrial films. So I'm really glad that the technology and the future sort of assists more and more in this more subtle way of working.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it makes it easier and cheaper, doesn't it? Because anybody who has a phone can film in, if not 4K, at least HD. So it gets you much better quality footage than you would have got even a few years ago.
Yeah.
Well, and think about, too, what is storytelling? Nowadays, if you can record something physically, you can have a podcast. If you can make an image, you can have a YouTube channel. You have the agency to reach anyone in the world if you want to, with your words, with your ideas. There's a lot of stuff, and so it's hard to wade through, and it's hard to find the voices. There's so many.
But when you find the voice, it's incredible.
It's incredible. And Craig, you don't have to be this really famous and important figure in the UK media in order to have a podcast where you take a flyer on having a conversation with a couple guys in Western Canada who've made a movie you've never heard of. Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not a big player in the UK podcasting space.
But the fact is you don't have to be.
No.
It doesn't matter.
I do this because I like it, because I get to have these kinds of conversations. I always get something really profound out of them. I think it's really good talking to people about their experiences. I mean, I'm never going to be rich. I'm never going to get to give up the day job, probably, but it's not necessarily about that.
I like that the technology's there and that it's possible to have these kinds of conversations. That, to me, is the community that the internet once upon a time really promised is actually there. Unfortunately, there's all this other stuff. I remember years ago, I had a young guy. I was working with him on a video project because him and his partner were selling to business people. If you can imagine this, they were selling to business people the idea that the internet could be used to promote their businesses, i.e. advertising. But it was at that time, this is in the 90s, the internet was not a place for ads. It was an intellectual space. And they were trying to show business people that if you just framed things in terms of meaningful content, it was a very nuanced idea. People were paying hordes of money to them to give these talks about how to approach the internet, give people kind of a primer in how to approach the internet. And of course, nowadays, it's just a huckster. Yeah. Everything from everywhere is dumped onto the internet. But there is, at its essence and its core, this concept of community and exchange and ideas and ideology. And that's really beautiful. And when you meet Craig in the UK, or you talk to someone in Germany, or you have these kind of narratives and conversations across borders, boundaries, and oceans about ideas, you realize that there is this wonderful thing that we have.
And if the pandemic had happened even 15 years earlier, it would have had a lot more mental toll on people, I think, because it's not as easy to connect in the way that we can connect now.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The pandemic, it was the Zoom quizzes on a Sunday night or whatever that people were doing. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to do that as easily even a few years earlier. So in a way, it was good that it happened when it did, because we did have access to do all this.
Yeah.
Not that the pandemic was a good thing as such, but I think it was good that we had these avenues to reach out.
I miss it.
Well, we have human beings are very creative and resourceful. It's fascinating. I was doing a film before the pandemic. It was an ensemble project, a big project with all these young women. And I wanted to co-create stories with each of them that was very specific and meaningful to their lives. So it's drama, it's fiction, but it was all improvised, and it was all sort of a collab with each of these women. And the idea was to try to shine a light on what it's like to be 18 18 to 25 in this moment, because I have a daughter who's coming up to that age, and I was fascinated with her worldview. And I thought, well, this will be interesting. So I picked these different cities to work in. And the way in which we had the conversations and built the narratives was through this correspondence. And back then we used Skype, and it was buggy and in and out and whatever. And it's amazing how different even a few years it is. But being able to use technology to assist in removing barriers of geography, of time and space, that's incredible.
Skype, which has been shut down this week as we record, actually. It's now no more. It's over.
Wow.
And obviously the pandemic gave birth to the Zoom movie, where a bunch of people in different locations were just filming a conversation they were having and made it into a movie. A couple of the Zoom horrors were very good because they were just so creative.
Yeah.
Right.
Been a great conversation about the film and the industry and all that stuff. So I'll ask something very lighthearted just to close us off, because we're a nerdy focused podcast and we deal with a lot of superhero and comic book stuff. What superpower would you have if you could have anyone, and why?
Carl, you first.
It's probably been made into a movie, I'm sure, but I've always thought it would be interesting to have the ability to hear and know what people are thinking.
Ooh.
It's a tricky one.
That sounds dangerous.
It is dangerous, but I
dangerous.
like this idea. I have a dog. You think about how dogs can't talk, but they always know what's going on. They know if you're afraid. They know if you're happy. There's a sort of intuitiveness in animals. And I think we human beings have this inherently, but more and more we lose touch with it because we're so technologized. We're sort of losing touch with our intuitiveness. But that ability to kind of feel and understand without speaking is, I think, marvelous.
Wow. That's a good one.
There's certainly a lot of people that don't want to know what they're thinking.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to go with, and I'd never really thought about this until you asked the question, Craig, but I'm going to jump into the time travel realm. And that's only come out of this conversation because I realized when we made this film and I was playing the character, really what I was focused on was Peter's journey in terms of what was right in front of him, these obstacles that were in front of him. He was a man of a certain age. His career wasn't what he had anticipated it being. And I got really caught up in that, in what was right in front of me. But the more that we talk about the film and the more time I spend with it, I realize how connected to history it is. And Carl, you had talked earlier about your father's passport and what a huge shadow he cast over the film. And I realized that also lives very strongly for me. My father died in 1977 when I still lived in Scotland. And so the idea of being able to teleport myself back to a time when I could talk to him, have a conversation with him as a man would be incredible.
Yeah, totally.
Just don't leave any books of sports statistics lying around for people to find them.
Yes, exactly.
You jump right into the pragmatic.
And then I was thinking, while I was having a conversation with my father, I could also be buying future Apple stock.
Invest in Bitcoin before anybody knew what it was, that kind of stuff. Well, that would get you any film you want made, wouldn't it? You would just be a billionaire and you could finance anything.
That's right.
But you might lose the art if you did it that way.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah,
I
want to say that something I've learned over my life that I just want to share as a closer is don't underestimate the importance of struggle and of failure and of difficulty, all of these things that seem negative. Actually, they're your ally in your work, whatever you do. But as a creator, I really feel like I'm actually really grateful for, I never really became a big, successful, rich Hollywood filmmaker. It wasn't for lack of trying. There were lots of meetings and lots of occasions, and maybe it's not in my DNA, but I feel like I'm really happy with the struggles that I've had because it's taught me a lot about humanity. It's taught me a lot about my life, and it's a great teacher. Struggle is a great teacher.
Well, Beckett called life itself the struggle.
And there's that quote about inventing the light bulb. You failed to make a light bulb. No, I've just found a few ways not to make a light bulb. That's not the exact quote, but
yeah, exactly.
I've got to keep trying it until I get it right.
Yeah.
The fact that I've not done it yet doesn't mean that I'm going to stop.
Exactly.
Oh, so
exactly.
good.
Thanks very much for your time. It's been an amazing conversation. I really hope the film gets in front of people's eyes and people actually get to see it, because it sounds like it could be a very poignant viewing experience. I haven't seen it yet, but I would like to. I think I would get a lot out of it. So thanks very much for your time. Good luck with it. I really hope it gets in front of people.
Thank you, Craig. Really great to speak with you.
Yeah, really lovely to talk to you, Craig. And thanks for such a thoughtful interview.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That was my interview with Carl Bessai and Vincent Gale. All the best to them for the film and all future projects. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Please also leave us a 5-star rating and a review. If you want to talk about anything discussed here or anything else, you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Blue Sky under Kneel Before Blog, or leave a comment on kneelbeforeblog.co.uk. You can also join us on Discord. For more interviews, a monthly news podcast, and deep dive analytical discussions about your favourite nerdy things, you can continue to join us on Kneel Before Pods.